Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Heretic Hammer Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall, and this is my co-host, Dylan.
Hello, hello.
And today, my procrastination ends.
Hooray!
Now, in some ways, a lot of people look at the wars for Armageddon that it's, kind of just about like orcs versus Yarrick and the Steel Legion. Maybe some Crimson Fists in there, Blood Angels. But, Armageddon has had many a battle in its complex history, and especially one that I believe make it more complicated by its secretive origins that I'm unsure about bringing up right now, as it's technically a spoiler for War of the Beast, which is something, while I loathe the idea of discussing in detail, is rather important, at least especially for Imperial Fist lore. Like the War of the Beast is like, it's important for a number of levels, to be honest. Like, as much as I hate how it was put together as a story,
Yeah. Okay.
there is things about it. It is canon, and there are many things that are important about it. One of which being details of Armageddon. But that, I think we will have to talk about it. Thus, I feel like it's not good to bring it up now, right? But just know there's kind of a reason that these things seem to continue to happen to Armageddon, and it's part of that origin. Partly. However, today we'll discuss the first of the 3 wars for Armageddon. However, a part of some of this, I should note, we'll talk about kind of a post-Third War conflict that's kind of a sequel to this first war that we'll talk about today. But I bring this up because, first, I've errantly brought up the idea that I thought it was the 4th war for Armageddon. But it was essentially kind of like a various bookended sequels in a way, However, the 4th war is actually the label for the next war for Armageddon. I guess unless we're utilizing Imperial records, because maybe that would mean that it's the 4th, but technically it should be the 5th. But according to the sources I was looking at, this is the thing that Adeptus Ridiculous also labeled as the 4th war for Armageddon, and I considered the 4th war for Armageddon, is apparently just a one little mini war. So it's kind of just like a post Third War kerfuffle. But I guess part of that is because it didn't last very long too. So I guess take it for what you will.
Yeah. Okay.
Today, though, we will just talk about the first war for Armageddon.
Great. I like that. Let's just start from the first one.
Yes.
Which should have been the last one, but unfortunately,
unfortunately, there are quite a many things that will come from this. And again, one day, all will be revealed as to why it seems as though this planet just cannot catch a break. But to get to know Armageddon a little bit, it is a hive world of the Imperium. It is the 4th planet of the Armageddon system, and Armageddon's surface features 3 main bodies of land: the fire wastes surrounding the North Pole, the Deadlands surround the South Pole, and one large equatorial land mass. And these continents are separated by a world ocean. Very strange land, I think, combo in there,
Not exactly a Pangea going on.
No,
with this
it
one,
sounds quite odd in some regard, like it's just like, I'm like, how would I wrap my head around this, like the design of this? But looking at it, like descriptor wise, that sounds bad, but actually looking at a picture of it, it's kind of like, oh, I guess I see how that works. Okay, that makes sense. There's actually a decent amount of land. It just makes it sound like it being an equatorial landmass, that it would be like a strip of land surrounding its equator, like
That's like, yeah. So like, what does it look like on the other side? Like,
that
does
I
it look
couldn't
the
tell
same
you.
all the way around?
I don't know. I got this picture.
That's what confuses me.
Right. Unfortunately, I have this
me,
picture, and that's what I've got. So
I think this descriptor makes sense if the world is flat. Which, hey, for all we know, it could be. We don't know.
However,
all we know is that Earth is round.
Yes.
And nothing's going to change that. But this is an Earth, so it could be flat.
Oh, dude, man, I watched a video of this guy making fun of flat earthers stream reacting to the Artemis 2 launch. Oh, so funny.
Oh, man.
So funny. Anyway, for the case of Armageddon, the equatorial landmass is what supports the majority of the planet's population, including a number of hive cities, and it is split into two continents, Armageddon Prime and Armageddon Secundus. Prime is on the west, Secundus to the east, and the region is dominated by a massive jungle. It is also said that the atmosphere is so thick with hydrogen sulfides and carbon oxides that an average human requires mechanical assistance to breathe. But due to this thicker atmosphere, Armageddon is very well protected by cosmic radiation. So it's kind of this realm of like, that's why you'll see the soldiers of Armageddon, the Steel Legion, often in gas masks. And thus why, especially when I was very new to the hobby and everything else, that I actually confused them for Deathcore Creek.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to. Where are you? My brain is. I'm starting to feel it. I'm starting to feel the Steel Legion. Jesus. Okay, I'm trying to. No, give me the link. Damn it. Thank you. Jeez. We will talk more in detail, honestly, about the Steel Legion, but I wanted to wait until the second war. Not because the Steel Legion don't do anything in this battle. In fact, it is quite important. But due to events that occur during this war and the fact that it's kind of it's a little bit more of like a Space Wolf story, I want to wait until the next time because of things that will happen that we'll get into in a bit that I feel like greatly affect the culture of the world and lead to the Steel Legion as we know them now.
Okay.
So that's kind of why, at least, I don't want to get into detail about the Legion itself quite yet. Kind of the first War for Armageddon, honestly, is like really, honestly, it's fairly simple. Just kind of a classic tale of imperial Pyrrhic victory, and and this isn't much of a spoiler because you can't have 4 wars for Armageddon if they lost every war.
You know what?
I guess in a way you could, but
I don't think I can
case
debate
of
that.
chaos, as we learned with Cadia, that's really hard. So
yeah, certainly.
Either way, let's get into kind of the war itself. So by getting into before the war started. So chaos obviously usually is very hard to unify, right? Like they don't often work with each other. It can be hard to create a large invasion fleet. But you know what? It really helps that is when it's being led by a Primarch that's still floating around, and that is especially a demon Primarch. That usually helps.
Well, it can't hurt.
Certainly not, especially if that one is Angron. So, you know, he and the World Eaters just kind of hanging out in the Eye of Terror and the Warp, you know, or like the like in between that the Eye of Terror is, and you know they're mucking about, they're fighting each other, they're infighting, they're taking lands, they're doing whatever, and all of a sudden this Space Hulk arrives called the Devourer of Stars.
Good name.
Mm-hmm. And what was important about this is that the Hulk was large enough to carry a huge chaos force, so that essentially they could hop out of the Eye of the Terror and bring themselves to Armageddon, as the currents of the warp kind of drew the invasion force towards the planet around M41 444. So it'd be 40,444. So pretty like mid-level, like pretty mid-level, you know, 40k stuff. And inherently, I guess you could even honestly say though, from where we mostly see stuff pretty early, right? And this is like Armageddon has spanned through the entire history of this as a game and franchise, right? So we're really starting from the beginning in some capacity, because Angron's kind of only existed in various ways, you know, through, because I forgot like when technically the idea of the Primarchs like first came about in lore, like what year or whatnot. Because like Horus started as a footnote in the first edition.
That's wild to think about.
Yeah, one day we're going to talk about old lore stuff, because they're really cool. There's just cool stuff. Just because, you know, it's interesting. But anyway, and then on Armageddon at this time, a series of strange events culminated in an armed rebellion breaking out in half a dozen hives. You know, and so from the three land masses, you know, as we mentioned, there's Prime and Secundus on that kind of equatorial landmass. So the revolts were kind of able to be quickly put down in Armageddon Secundus. But because the hives on Armageddon Prime were more spread out and scattered, they were harder to eradicate. They were able to kind of make more use, because essentially I don't know if necessarily they were spread out, that they were smaller, but that would logically make sense to me. It's just not really labeled like if they were smaller or not.
Mm-hmm.
But it felt that at the time that planetary defenses seemed capable of dealing with the revolt, so no additional units were sent by the Imperium. And because Armageddon was a very long way from the Eye of Terror, no one suspected the cause for the revolts was more sinister than just simple unrest. Then we get into the war. It's just like, and guess what?
Smash cut to war.
Right. It's just like, it just sets itself up as like, they had no reason to believe that chaos exists. Cue, It's Always Sunny title card. Chaos invades.
Yep. The gang does Armageddon.
There's no way that we could be invaded by chaos. The gang is invaded by chaos.
Mm-hmm.
So the Devourer of Stars housed an enormous Chaos army led by Demon Primarch Angron. So there were Chaos Marines from the World Eaters Legion, cultists, demon hosts, mutants, beastmen, and hordes of demonic creatures poured out from the Space Hulk and descended on Armageddon Prime first. So obviously the World Eaters, just rearing for a good fight in real space, descended upon the planet's populace with fury. They butchered millions within the first weeks of the conflict. The remaining loyal defenders were quickly routed from Armageddon Prime, many of them falling back into the jungles to the south. The survivors joined up with units from Armageddon Secundus and prepared to make the last ditch defense along the rivers of Styx and Charon, Chaeron, Carrion. I don't know.
I think Charon.
Sharon. Anyway,
Sharon.
While the Imperial defense was well organized, the Imperial defense stayed well organized, and the forces of chaos were not aware that Logan Grimnar and his great company of Space Marines from the Space Wolves had been assigned to this sector of the Imperium. And as they got word, they quickly moved to help the beleaguered Imperial defenders. So, upon the introduction of the Space Wolves, huge battles erupted along the entire front. While the Space Wolves were outnumbered 1,000 to 1, Grimnar kept the charge going. The World Eaters pursued the Space Wolves mechanized forces into the jungle, but this would be a trap, as Space Wolf and Steel Legion ambushes along the Sharon, whatever, would ensnare the World Eaters, and they would be slaughtered. However, in the west, the assault along the river Styx was spearheaded by Angron himself and the Cruor Praetora. I'm quite terrible at this pronunciation here for some of these. However, this is a warband of 12 bloodthirsters who essentially are like Angron's personal bodyguards, and are essentially just like, because they are an honor guard, effectively just quite strong bloodthirsters and just straight up demons, not world eaters.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah. The Primarch and his bloodthirsters smashed through the Imperial lines, and his forces were led towards Hive Infernus and Hive Hell's Reach. Hell's Reach will definitely come up at a point in a future Armageddon episode, especially with a famous Black Templar. Yes. We'll talk about, and I will note, actually, with that, we are going to do a Black Templars episode before we do that. We do the episode that involves them in that Armageddon, because yes, as you were mentioning, it's going to be rather important.
It'll be good to have the context.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and also just to kind of see like why maybe their impact could feel better in some regards, or at least that their presence could be more impactful is a better way to word that. However, the Guard and the Space Wolves managed to desperately hold the line and bought enough time for incoming allies. And when Logan Grimnar realized the nature of their foe, he called for the support of the Grey Knights. They were inherently the only chapter militant of the Inquisition's demon hunters, and felt that they would be the ones to have the ability to truly defeat a demonic entity as powerful as Angron. So the Grey Knights dispatched 109 Terminator Assault Marines who attacked Angron directly, along with his Cruor Praetoria. They did this by teleporting straight into the eye of the storm, essentially, and into the center of his demon army. This would prove to be a bit of a ballsy strategy that did not immediately pay off.
Yeah.
Yeah, it did not work out right away. Initially, Angron had decimated a number of the Grey Knights. However, in which he had actually struck down 5 Grey Knight Terminators with a single stroke of his black blade. However, it was due to the psychic might of a young recruit named Hyperion. The black blade would be shattered, and the Grey Knights had now gained an advantage. So soon after, Brother Captain Terramar Aurelian was killed while personally banishing Angron back to the warp for 100 years and a day. Why that? I don't know. Don't ask me. That's a realm of like, that's in a book somewhere, you know, like
lost to time. Buried away in an ancient tome.
Yeah, like probably something like I mean, like, for example, like some of that information comes from the book The Emperor's Gift, which I have heard is a decent book for Grey Knights by Aaron Dembski Bowden. Part of that because he is a pretty dang good author. But you know, but I obviously do not have the time to read all these books from that, because another part of it comes from White Dwarf 279. So, you know, that's why I got to work through going through all the various summaries. However, this would though work out, as despite the sacrifice, other demons that were then vanished without Angron, and the remaining cultists, mutants, and traitors turned to flee in panic. They were pursued into the Ash Waste by the Space Marines and Steel Legion, and inevitably were completely destroyed. However, this was, again, as mentioned, a Pyrrhic victory, as only 13 of 109 Grey Knights would survive.
Oh.
Yeah, it didn't go hot.
Nope, didn't go well.
Now, you may be like, damn, that sounds like we went through the whole war pretty fast. This is where you ask the question.
What am I missing, Marshall? What am I missing here?
Okay, it's 2 things. First, there is plenty of source material on the war, right? It is not as if the war truly was like short. I mean, let's look at the reality. Like, this involved a great number of losses, a great number, like a distinct battle. You know, there was so much to it. There are plenty of source materials.
But it sounds like there's not you don't really have like a Ken Burns 6-hour documentary that you can just pull directly from.
Correct. But also it's kind of like, you know, it's it's tough because in many ways I try to not make the episode itself centered around essentially like bolter porn, as it's called, you know, where it's just like, here's a description of this battle where the person fought this thing, and then they had to wage their faith.
They shot the gun good.
Yeah, and they carried their faith in the light of the emperor in the face of the demonic beast. And if you want that, read the book. This is about like the actions and their consequences. So what matters about the war for Armageddon is less about the actions and way more about the consequences.
Okay.
Thus, this is a great episode for us then, and also discuss the months of shame. I partly debated doing this as a part of Space Wolves lore because it's rather important, but I feel like the months of shame is honestly the most interesting thing to come out of the first war for Armageddon. So, let's essentially the months of shame basically begin. There are arguments maybe what you could say it truly begins. For me, though, I would say a good marker is at the end of the first war. So, in the years to come, knowledge of the first war would be heavily suppressed by the Inquisition, And this would be to the point that even the inhabitants of Armageddon itself only believe that there had been 2 wars for their planet. How they deal with this with the number system later, I don't know. But we're not there now.
We don't play 40k for numbers, okay?
I don't know.
There's numbers involved,
Well,
but that's
my
not
thought
why we're
is
here.
like when we get to the 3rd war for Armageddon, do they call that the 2nd war for Armageddon? I don't know. So
do they call it the Lion King 1.5? We'll find out.
However, although they had won, the victorious soldiers of Armageddon were doomed. They had gained knowledge of the existence of chaos and had been exposed to its corruption. And this is a big thing at this point. We don't have, the explosion of the Eye of Terror. We don't have the explosion of Cadia yet. We don't have, chaos incursions basically everywhere at this point, right? Like,
okay.
Chaos was kept as much under wraps as possible at this point in 40k's lore. So it was looked at, especially by the Ordo Malleus, as the best way to fight against the wills of chaos is to ensure that people don't know about it, therefore they cannot turn to it.
Oh.
Now, whether or not this is a justified manner is tough, because, for example, something like Tzeentch is still going to find their ways into the minds of various humans. And if anything, Tzeentch will disguise himself as the will of the Emperor, but then ending up making you do something horrible, and warriors are still going to find ways, like one way or the other, the Chaos Gods can find their way. But it's kind of like a conversation I once had on a stream once, which was like, if somehow the galaxy could get like the Men in Black forgetful pen, and like,
there was
the
like neuralizer,
yeah, and everybody forgets everything about chaos, every single living human or being, right? Do the Chaos Gods just suddenly have no power? And the answer is no, right? Like they have the power that they have already attained. And it's through that while they will be weaker in that moment, they still can get into people's minds to convince them, to teach them, to make them learn. And then all of a sudden you've got, you just start the cycle again. One way or the other, they're already in enough power where they're not just going to get rid of them by not knowing anything. But it was always felt as though it's the first defense against chaos is ignorance to it, right? So, unfortunately now, the Inquisition had all of the people who fought on the planet, except for Space Marines, sterilized and then placed into work camps off planet. Armageddon then was recolonized by people from other regions of space with no knowledge of the war. This is obviously kind of the first bit of an issue, right? Because you successfully fought and survived for your planet, for your hive, and instead you are punished for it. You are punished for succeeding. So the Space Wolves did not appreciate this because they felt they should be rewarded, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially given that the Inquisition and the Grey Knights ended up purging Imperial Navy and Adeptus Mechanicus ships orbiting the planet. Grey Knight strike cruisers would destroy Imperial Guard troop transports as they were departing. This became a big thing, as then the Space Wolves would see this And in order to attempt to protect those soldiers that fought so willingly against the like side by side with the Space Wolves and moving through them, they would escort, the Space Wolves began to escort, not export, but escort those ships.
In a matter of speaking.
Yeah. Those ships from the planet. However, as the Grey Knights and the Inquisition would fire upon the Space Wolves ships, the Space Wolves would not return fire, as they did not want to give the Inquisition any reason to believe that, or to declare them a renegade chapter.
Yeah. Yeah. As soon as they fire back, they could be like, they shot at us. Yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of first founding chapters like the Space Wolves, the Blood Angels, Imperial Fists, they get a lot of street cred because, they're the originals. But the Inquisition is not necessarily not going to be unwilling to label them a renegade because of that, right? They don't have, especially when they don't have a Primarch to help them out. However, when the Space Wolves battle barge Gilfarheim arrives over Armageddon,
sure, Norse, why not?
The Inquisition and Grey Knights are forced to stand down and face the Space Wolves' overwhelming firepower. Multiple troop transports are able to escape due to the Space Wolves' aid. However, Lord Inquisitor Kisnaros pushes further. Thus, any world, specifically 3 nearby Imperial worlds, would be put to the sword to silence the populace when they had heard of the exploits of the stormtroopers that were at the Battle of Hell's Reach or were helped by the Space Wolves. These purges claimed several billions of souls, and this Inquisitor would subject these planets to exterminatus.
Okay.
Yes. And this is kind of important because this would even include the Adeptus Astra Telepathica station, Rallis Meridian, which is incredibly important because getting rid of any Astra Telepathica planet is essentially a death sentence for communication in the area. And also, honestly, bold to also get rid of the Adeptus Mechanicus outpost, giving that could easily be seen by the Mechanicus as a violation of the Treaty of Olympus Mons.
Yeah, it's like an act of war right there.
Pretty much. But it is the Inquisition, and they kind of are, in many ways, allowed to do that. But because it's the Mechanicus, if they had heard about it, and if they had felt inclined, they very much probably could have argued reasons to fight against them with that. Like, they could have found a reason, right? So it's suffice to say, my point in bringing all that up is that, like, the Inquisitor is kind of being a prick about this.
You don't say.
Yeah, I know.
Who would have thunk it?
This kind of began basically a Cold War. Wherever the Space Wolves would move and run to, and that the Inquisition would try to come in and fight them. The Space Wolves would essentially just sit there, create a shield. They would the Inquisition and Grey Knights would try to blockade, and it would just be this cat and mouse game where the Space Wolves would refuse to fire, and they would kind of have this back and forth. So after months of this back and forth, Kisnaros and Grand Master Joros of the Grey Knights would meet with Grimnar in neutral space to negotiate a settlement. However...
And that went well, right?
Yeah, well, see, here's the thing. Remember when I said that Kisnaros is a prick?
Yeah. Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. So as soon as Space Wolves ships entered the rendezvous point, Kisnaros just fired at them. Because again, He's a fucking prick. And in this, Grimnar's flagship, the Gilforheim, would be crippled. And it was at the behest then of Kisnaros and Joros that Grimnar would agree to teleport on board their ship and quote unquote surrender himself. However, when he would enter the ship with his escort of Terminators, he instead scolded the Inquisition for its violation of laws of parley and use of such underhanded tactics. And thus, as being more defiant than submissive, Grimnar demanded to know who had ordered the attack on his fleet. Joros had then confirmed that he had given the order. He basically, in doing so, consigned himself to his fate, as Grimnar, in basically less than a second, and granted, Logan Grimnar is a big dude. He's in large power armor. He is the chapter master of the Space Wolves. He's a big guy.
Yeah, I believe it.
He in less than a second moves to Joros and beheads him.
Oh.
With his power axe.
Yeah, okay.
Essentially, this is that realm of like, who broke the rules? All right, I am essentially punishing your legion for this. You made the order. I am taking your head. And then began to teleport back to his ship, because obviously at this point they were going to be like the rest of everyone else, even though Joros had kind of come to terms with the fact that this was going to happen. We're like going to be like, no, and we're going to start firing at them. However, the Grey Knights had anticipated this, as I kind of mentioned, moves such as this, and restrained the teleporters on the wolves' armor. And essentially the wolves will react to this by killing most of the Grey Knights' Justicars with their Stormbolters and throwing the Knights' psychic concentration into chaos. Kisnaros, ill-experienced in dealing with the ferocity of the Space Wolves, stood down and allowed Grimnar to escape. The wolves would then become more hostile after this ambush and engaged in destroying the Grey Knights and Inquisition ships they encountered. They would show no mercy to personnel on board.
Sure.
So it was in this point then that Kisnaros, definitely ill-equipped to deal with the situation, not only allowed Grimnar to escape, but then was able to escape himself, essentially. However, the Kisnaros was a stubborn fool. And from this attack, essentially used this as an excuse to gather an entire battle fleet of the Imperial Navy, along with the entirety of the Red Hunters chapter of Space Marines, which is kind of a like strong tied to the Inquisition type of Space Marine chapter. Their logo even literally has, here, let me get it for you, literally has like the Inquisition eye on the skull of their logo, like, so pretty, like, they're definitely kind of at the beck and call of the Inquisition.
Yep. Yes, very much so.
But it was in this that Kisnaros would ask Hyperion, the Grey Knight, who was who was incredibly important to the banishing of Angron before their original, chapter master essentially died banishing him. But he also had Inquisitor Jarl's daughter. I think it's Jarl's daughter. I don't know if it's daughter, but I think it's supposed to be daughter. Jarl's
How's it spelled?
daughter. JARLSDOTTYR.
Oh.
I think it's Jarl's daughter, partly for a reason.
I think that is daughter.
Yeah, well, and it'll make more sense, especially when we get into it here in a moment. But Hyperion and Jarlsdottir were to join him as representatives of the Grey Knights and the Inquisitorial Ordos. So here, the idea was that Kisnaros was hoping to, give this rebellious chapter an ultimatum, to have them commit to a penitent crusade and or have them burn. However, while he was really hoping that this Grey Wolves would submit. And if we're going to learn anything about the Grey Wolves, the answer to that is they don't do that. This is not what the Space Wolves do. Kisnaros is an idiot. He is very much like the classic, like, bad Inquisitor to me, just like way thinks way too highly of himself and his stature, and does not understand that the Space Marines especially do not give a shit about what the Inquisitor has to think.
Gotcha.
I think especially Kisnaros forgets that in many ways Space Marines can absolutely look an Inquisitor in the face and be like, fuck off. Because like they get a lot of gray area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
However, the Space Wolves were definitely bled thin at this point. And the fleet were able to create, kind of a perimeter and kind of lock in the Fang. It would be in this point that Bjorn the Fell-Handed, a well-known and seen dreadnought ancient of the Space Wolves, who has the especially really funny part of his like character arc, where he often now, especially at this point, like in the 42nd millennium, where he gets awakened and he'll mention like when he spoke to the Emperor once, because like, he's from the Horus Heresy, so he'd be like, I spoke to the Emperor once about this. And people are like, you knew the Emperor? And he's like, oh fuck, don't do the thing.
Oh man.
Don't do the bowing thing. Oh fuck.
Oh my God. Can I get a picture?
Shut the fuck up. No. Because again, he's in that realm of
Can you tell him about my idea for a podcast?
Look, I love the Emperor. He's like, he's essentially my dad and all that, but like, bro, he's just a guy. Fuck off. Like, stop. But yes, Bjorn is obviously thus an ancient and a great advisor for the Space Wolves. We'll talk more about him when we talk about the Space Wolves someday.
Mm-hmm.
But he was awoken to help, especially with negotiations, especially because it became very clear that the Wolves would never, especially with Logan, would never submit to the Inquisition's demands. And thus Grimnar not only had entered orbit above Fenris, but would essentially teleport right above Kisnaros' ship. While Kisnaros continued to try to contain the situation, he had at this point essentially pushed the Space Wolves too far. And not only did the battle in space begin at this point in earnest, the ships would ram into each other as boarding actions by assault boats would be committed by both sides. This is a point where like Fenris Fenris not only was like in a tough spot just because the Space Wolves were kind of out and like trying to recover before getting back to Fenris, but they had recently sustained a large 1,000 Suns invasion, called the Battle of the Fang. But this was a distinct like incursion led by Magnus, this was a big deal.
Certainly.
So despite the Space Wolves being outnumbered, essentially partly just due to really good tactics by Logan Grimnar, Grimnar once again was able to teleport onto the flagship of the Inquisitor and the Grey Knights, and was able to massacre all Grey Knights and stormtroopers they came across, even with the protection of the famed Hyperion. It is in this point that despite Hyperion being there, Kisnaros would be brutally slain by Grimnar as he rushed the bridge. It does get noted later that it is essentially felt that the Inquisitor's logic and actions were somewhat betrayed by his own subordinate, that of Annika, Jarl's daughter, who was a native Fenrisian. Which is also why I think it is Jarl's daughter, because that makes sense. It's a very
makes
Norse
sense,
name.
yeah.
It's kind of, they probably picked it to feel essentially tied to the fact that she is in a way like a Jarl's daughter, you know? Like, that's my thought. But her background predisposed her to revering the Imperium's heroes, the Space Wolves, rather than disposing of them. However, it was due to the fact that Bjorn teleported onto the ship and convinced Grimnar to not only stand down, he had essentially was the idea that the battle had gone long enough, and now that Kisnaros was dead, that essentially that the fight was over. Grimnar and Hyperion essentially both accepted and agreed to stand down. The Inquisitorial fleet would depart from Fenris, and the wolves reluctantly halted their campaign against the Inquisition. This, however, would not halt. Because of that, it would not stop the process of repopulating Armageddon. So that is why, despite the there are probably some veterans of the original War for Armageddon out there. There are very few, and likely they cannot discuss the fact that they are a veteran, as the rest of Armageddon was in fact still repopulated despite the anger and the disagreements of the Space Wolves, but they had essentially proven their point at this juncture. And it is thus why the Grey Knights call it the month of shame, which we talked about a bit in our episode about the Grey Knights. But this just gave us a more full detailing of it. This way we get to know more. So it's in the aftermath of this dispute that Grimnar never forgave nor forgot the war, and the Space Wolves are viewed with great animosity by much of Segmentus Solar's administratum.
Yeah,
and the
sounds about right.
Yeah, the Grey Knights and Space Wolves always kind of have this tense, light beef with each other. They will
antagonistic nature.
Yeah, they will work together. They are not going to go against the greater good of the Imperium, but they definitely will not choose to work together. This also would create a lot of casualties and set the Space Wolves back quite a bit, as unfortunately, other than Space Wolves descendants that would come from the second founding, the Space Wolves do not have many, I guess you could say, like, they don't have many successor chapters, right? Because after, for whatever reason, there's technically a few, right? But for various reasons, some of which may be less understanding, they had one second founding chapter called the Wolf Brothers. However, this chapter would be later disbanded by the Inquisition due to their genetic instability. So, and then the next one wouldn't be until the Ultima founding, so the Primaris. So from the first splitting of Space Wolves, from their Legion status to chapter status, they had 1 second founding, because technically the second founding is mostly made up of just chapters, right? Because the first founding is the, like the 18 legions. Not 20. Why would it be 20?
Had to check yourself on that number, huh?
I know. It was just, you gotta be careful. You never know who's listening.
Yeah.
So the second founding generally. So what's funny is like technically like there shouldn't even have been a worry of making extra Space Marines, but I don't know the answer as to why maybe they specifically the second founding for the Space Wolves had to maybe include more new Space Marines or whatever. But essentially, like one way or the other, the Space Wolves are kind of the only ones that have been able to deal with this. And so that's losing at this point now that they are a normal, chapter and not the full size Legion they once were. And then facing this level of conflict. That was weird. This really did a number and set them back for a long time. So they had to spend a lot of time to find new recruits, and essentially inevitably the Inquisition had to rebuild a planet in Armageddon. So what's kind of funny is the war for Armageddon was less about, or like what hurt Armageddon the most was less the war for Armageddon, but instead the months of shame that followed afterward.
Yeah.
And thus, that is basically it about the first war for Armageddon.
Having heard all that, you know what? Shame is a good name for it.
Yeah. Because in a way, it's a shame for all of them, but it is the biggest shame for the Grey Knights that they were so dedicated to following along with the Inquisition that they let themselves do something so ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
But this is also why then we have the long-standing meme of being like, like the degrading Mr. Incredible, where it's like we're getting Imperial reinforcements, I hear it's Space Marines. Oh, it's the Grey Knights.
It's Grey Knights.
Uh-oh. I'm in danger. As we have talked about, though, obviously, since especially the War for Cadia and the opening of the Great Rift, this has become less and less of a thing. But up until that point, this would continue to be a bit of a nail or a thorn in the side of really anybody that came into conflict with chaos. And the poor sons of bitches that were in the Imperial Guard in any of those periods of time. The Grey Knights, part of it was also that the Grey Knights were meant to be kept a secret, and thus their involvement in the war for Armageddon would jeopardize that. But once again, we are essentially now at a point where that isn't necessarily realistic. You kind of can't expect, you really can't expect the whole universe to essentially ignore the Grey Knights anymore, because they were part of Cadia and they will continue to be part of its history. People were there, people saw, people fought, so you kind of can't hide from it forever. But that's basically it. Any other thoughts or questions about the first war for Armageddon?
I'm so fascinated by there's a part of me that's like, how would I feel about this if I wasn't aware that there were going to be multiple other wars of Armageddon afterwards? because I feel
Sure.
like having that knowledge in the back of my brain, like it completely colors my perception of the like overall importance of this whole thing. I
Yeah.
definitely need to I need to learn about those other wars so that I can look at everything from this much bigger lens
Mhm.
in terms of like all these conflicts that are happening over Armageddon. But listening to it now, I'm just like, yeah, the shame comes from how there's this almost like feeling of pointlessness that comes from all of this conflict.
Exactly. I mean, like, obviously, you can't help if Angron decides, hey, I want to invade this planet now. Like, this from the Imperium side, it's like, well, that's what Angron's going to do. He is, you know, he is the demon Primarch of Khorne. So, you know, that's what he does. He's the war prince, effectively, right? So it's like,
Right.
you can't blame him particularly. Like, that's just what he does. So you have to defend, but like, you know, as an Imperium, you got to do right by the people who defend it. And they did not. And it was so unnecessary to do this, as we have learned. But they truly felt that, like, if they were allowed to have knowledge of these demons of chaos, that it would breed more conflicts in the future. And then, just ironically, this caused another great conflict that very much damaged both the Grey Knights and the Space Wolves, and lost an Inquisitor, and you know, in the process still, you know. So
yeah, everybody got burned on this one.
Yeah, pretty much. The benefit, though, is, as I mentioned, as I alluded to, we pretty much won't see the sequel to this, that whole banned for 100 years in one day thing. Although that's not even true, but we will not see them. We will not see the World Eaters again, with, as far as I know. Maybe we will. Maybe they'll be in the second or third wars, and I just don't realize it yet. But
surprise!
As far as I know, the sequel we will get to will essentially be kind of during the third war episode, because as far as I know, it's inherently so short of a sequence and story that we kind of will be able to go through it pretty quickly as an ending footnote to the third war for Armageddon.
Gotcha.
All right. Well, if you got nothing else, we can get ourselves out of here.
Okay. Armageddon, the beginning.
The beginning, yes.
Stay tuned in the future for more Armageddon, featuring Armageddon from the Armageddon series.
Yeah, next we'll talk a little bit. Going into it, we're gonna talk. I have to double check which war, but I believe it would be the next one. We are going to talk more about. We'll get some background. I have to determine whether or not the Steel Legion deserve their own total episode, or if that would be good to do as part of the second war episode. But the Steel Legion will play a much greater role in the second war. So that is thus why I wanted to wait until, not that they didn't play any role in this one. They were there, and they were honestly very important, but it is just incredibly important in the second war. Not war. Anyway. Who, what, where, what? But yes, until then, we will see you next time.
Goodbye.